So it really is an honor to be here with so many people who care so deeply about the environment, and to be here with the leaders of our Connecticut Environmental Rights Amendment Alliance, a collaboration of individuals and organizations of which I am proud to be a part, that have come together to really advance this cause here in the state of Connecticut. I thank you for the kind introduction and the kind words. To me, the most important thing I want you to know about me is that I've been an environmental activist and attorney for 30 years now. And it is as a result of that environmental activism and that legal work that I, like so many of you, have come to experience the myriad of ways that our current system of environmental protection laws here in the United States of America, no matter where you are, no matter what state, just fundamentally fails us. And that we truly do need a transformational pathway, a new transformational pathway here in the U.S. when it comes to environmental protection. And that's really what the Green Amendment movement is all about. It's about what I believe to be that transformational pathway that will get us to a new level, a different level of environmental protection that's so important and so essential. What I'd like to do is just, before I sort of do my remarks, which I hope don't go 30 minutes, I really want to just pick one of the stories from my book that I think really helps ground us in why protecting the environment is so important. This is not just some thought exercise, right? When we talk about the importance of protecting our environment, we really are talking about real people and real lives that are suffering real harm because of the pollution and the degradation that's happening in states across our nation, no matter where you are. And so I think that this story, at least for me, I think hits it home about as powerfully as you can bring it home. And so I just want to share it, or at least a portion of it. And I call this Gina's story. In the first house lived Gina's sister, Donna, who had tumors all over her body, and Donna's daughter, who was pregnant and repeatedly suffering inexplicable seizures. The next house belonged to Patsy, Gina's cousin, who'd had a basic water softener system in place for a decade. The system itself, along with the shipments of salt that kept it running, was provided by Mount Air Farms, which had agreed to install them in a handful of nearby houses after an EPA investigation found unacceptably high levels of nitrates, which cause cancer and birth defects, among other harms, when found in wells and groundwater. Next was Gina's house, where she lived with her mother. Gina was sick constantly, experiencing frequent gastrointestinal issues and hair loss that left her with permanent bald spots. Gina's daughter had been born with an extra ear, but no one had endured greater suffering or paid a higher price for Mount Air's callously destructive actions and pollution than Gina's son, Kiwanis. Like Gina, Kiwanis had been born with asthma. His case was particularly severe. When your asthma is at its worst, it's like somebody put a plastic bag over your head and just pulled on a string and cut off all your air circulation, says Gina. He really suffered. He just suffered, she added. When Kiwanis left Millsboro for a year to attend school, his condition seemed to improve significantly. But then he came home, and his asthma was once again a daily source of hardship. Despite nebulizers, inhalers, prescription steroids, and an EpiPen, he struggled to keep it under control. On March 5th, 2014, Gina got a frantic phone call. While hanging out in a house full of friends, Kiwanis had suffered an extremely severe asthma attack. They were calling an ambulance. She needed to drive immediately to the hospital. By the time Gina arrived, Kiwanis had passed away. He was just 24 years old. The thing is, that story didn't take place here in the state of Connecticut, but it could have, right? Stories like this are happening in communities across our nation. We have people across our nation who are drinking contaminated water, and as a result, there are children being born with low infant birth weights. We have kids getting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We have people and families suffering from cancers of all kinds: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and much, much more. We have people who are breathing polluted air that's causing heart attacks and asthma attacks. polluted air that has neurotoxicants in it that are so damaging, they're going into school grounds and damaging the brains of children so that they can't even properly learn the information that's being put before them by their teachers. Air pollution that's causing ADHD and Alzheimer's, right? The young are suffering, the older are suffering. Communities are being forced to live next to toxic sites and suffering the myriad of harms that toxic exposure causes. Species of all kind, non-human species, they're suffering too, right? The plants and the animals are being harmed in so many ways. And of course, as a community, as a state, as a nation, as a world, we're facing a climate crisis. People are suffering harm to their health and their safety from environmental pollution and degradation, right? They're suffering the health consequences, but they're also suffering from increasing flooding and flood damages, wildfires, droughts, right? Both ends of the spectrum, people are getting harmed. The sanctity of people's homes and hearts are being invaded by the fear and the harms and the horrors that pollution and environmental degradation cause. Right? There's a loss of economic security in communities across our nation because of environmental pollution and degradation, right? Economic prosperity and environmental prosperity, they go hand in hand, right? You can't have a healthy economy without a healthy environment. Very literally, every aspect of people's lives are being impacted by the way we treat the environment, impacted negatively or impacted positively. On the negative side, communities of color, indigenous communities, immigrant communities, low-income communities, they are suffering much worse than the rest of us. They suffer from disproportionate exposure to highly polluting industrial operations and environmentally degrading activities, impacting their lives day in and day out so severely and so sorely. And so much of this is happening because industry and business and politicians treat our environment and the resulting harms to people and to nature as though they're bargaining chips, right? Something to be negotiated away for profits or political access or power or personal luxury. And as a result, we have in place here in Connecticut, here in states across the United States of America at the federal level, we have a system of laws and governance which deems pollution and degradation acceptable. As long as the profit and the political gain is big enough, it's A-okay, right? We have a system of laws that really, when it comes to the environment, is focused on legalizing environmental pollution, degradation, and harm. It is not illegal to spew pollution into the air, to dump it into the water, to fill in a wetlands, to decimate a species that's on the brink of extinction, rob them of their healthy habitats that they need to survive. None of that is illegal as long as you go to the right agencies and you get the right reviews and you get the right permits. Then it's all very legal, right? So there have been benefits from the environmental laws that we have in place. But the benefits that have come with a ceiling. And in addition, they don't address many of the cumulative impacts and numerous aspects of the harm that's come along with pollution and degradation. So much evades the laws and the regulations that we have in place. So, that cap just isn't good enough. And we have people that are suffering. In this system of laws and governance, we have to say it again, environmental racism, systemic environmental racism is literally built in. With communities of color, low-income communities, indigenous communities, immigrant communities being intentionally targeted for those highly polluting industrial operations. They are not suffering disproportionate impacts in spite of the laws we have in place. They're suffering disproportionate impacts because of those laws, because of how they're intentionally written, interpreted, and applied, and either enforced or not enforced, right? So this is a system where ultimate power lies with the government. The government decides what laws they're going to write to regulate the environment. They decide how they're going to interpret those laws. They decide how they're going to apply those laws. They decide whether or not they're going to enforce those laws. And when the winds of politics change, they decide whether or not they're going to strip away even the minimal protections those laws give us. Right? So that power really lies with the government when it comes to environmental protection. It doesn't lie with we the people. Because so much of what is happening in terms of pollution and degradation is very legal under this system of laws and governance, right? Too often there's not much that we the people can do. We try, we protest, we try to elect better people to office, but we just don't have the necessary power to really take control in so many situations in this dynamic. But that is not how it works in other aspects of fundamental rights. When it comes to the right to free speech and freedom of religion, when it comes to private property rights, right? When it comes to the right to bear arms, ultimate power lies with the people, because those fundamental rights are recognized and protected in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions, and explicitly make clear that ultimate power lies with the people, that government officials are only acting in service to that constitutional entitlement of the people. And that when our government officials get it wrong and infringe on those fundamental rights, we, the people, can do something about it. We can get access to the courts and do something about it. Something meaningful, something powerful, and something important. And that's what the Connecticut Green Amendment is all about. It is about, in the environmental context, we, the people, taking our power back from government officials so that we do have the ultimate authority. We do have the ultimate entitlement. We are turning the tables so that the power lies with the people when it comes to environmental protection, as opposed to purely with our government officials. With the passage of the Connecticut Green Amendment, the Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment that's being advanced here in the state of Connecticut, the people will have, in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution, a constitutional right to clean and healthy water, air, soils, and environments, the right to a stable climate, the right to self-sustaining ecosystems. There will be an obligation on all government officials at every level of government to protect these environmental rights for all people equitably, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their tribal membership status, their socioeconomics, where they live, what their gender is, even what their generation is. All government officials will be constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all people equitably. And they will also have to protect the natural resources of the state, across the state of Connecticut. And they will have to make sure that those natural resources are protected equitably for all people as well, including future generations. And this idea of generational protection of natural resources and environmental rights, this is also not just a pretty idea. We've demonstrated in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where we have this kind of constitutional language already, we've proven in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that that obligation to protect the rights of future generations is actually enforceable. That future generations have the same right as those of us who are here today. They don't just get our leftovers when it comes to natural resources protections and environmental rights. Their rights are on par with our rights. So when our government officials take action, they have to make sure that they are protecting those rights and resources of future generations, also equitably on par with those of us who are here today. It's powerful, it's meaningful, it's enforceable. Every single word in the Connecticut Green Amendment, the Connecticut Environmental Rights Amendment, means something and brings additional power to the protection of the natural resources of this state and the environmental rights of the people of Connecticut. Now, the Connecticut Green Amendment, the Connecticut Environmental Rights Amendment that's being proposed is very different from what you see in most states across the nation. I call it a Green Amendment, not just an environmental rights amendment, because it actually meets these key criteria that I have identified along with colleagues, these key criteria that are essential for lifting up environmental rights so they are given highest constitutional recognition, protection, and enforceability here in the state of Connecticut. There are a lot of states across the nation that have environmental rights amendments. In fact, almost every state, save for about half a dozen, one of which is Connecticut, talks about the environment somewhere within their constitutions. Actually, dozens of them talk about environmental rights. They talk about the right of people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, right? They talk about it as great policy for the state. But in that word, policy of the state, that's the downfall of that amendment. Because policy, right, if you have an environmental right to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments, and that's the policy of our state, all that's saying is that's our advice to you government officials that we think you should follow. But you don't have to, because like all advice, You can take it or you can leave it. And more often than not, when it comes to the environment, our government officials will leave it. So there are a lot of environmental rights amendments that talk about rights, but it's good policy. So it's robbed of all its legal strength. Or we have a lot of states that talk about people having environmental rights in that state, and they say, and the way you get those rights is your state legislature will define them and defend them. So your right isn't actually to the clean, safe, and healthy environment described in that amendment. Your right is to have your legislators legislate. And if your legislators legislate badly in a way that sacrifices you, that sacrifices the natural resources of the state, that sacrifices future generations to a climate crisis, guess what? The Constitution said that was just fine, because there too, the legislators have the power. It's not really a right of the people, right? So what we're doing here in Connecticut, what's being proposed here in Connecticut, is a right of the people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, and a right of the people to ensure that their government officials protect the natural resources of the state for present and future generations, and the right of the people to ensure that those environmental rights and natural resources are protected equitably, regardless of race, ethnicity, tribal membership status, socioeconomics, gender, geography, or generation. Now, there are already 3 states that have this kind of right: Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York. Each one of those states has its own story for how they have these rights. Pennsylvania and Montana have had them for a little while now, and we've shown some real great, powerful legal precedent, right, coming out of those constitutional environmental rights amendments. And we were successful with our Green Amendments for the Generations movement as well, getting a constitutional green amendment passed in the state of New York by a vote of 70% of the people on November 2nd, 2021. So their green amendment went into effect January 1 of 2022, and we're already seeing positive, powerful impact. If Connecticut poses this proposed environmental rights amendment that meets the Green Amendment criteria, Connecticut could be state number 4 to have a constitutional green amendment. But whether or not you secure that number 4 spot, right, you're still an inspiration, because there really are only 15 other states. Now, that's a lot of states, but there are only 15 other states that are right now on this green amendment path as well. And so all of those states are looking at what each other states are doing. And let me tell you, people are looking at what's happening here in the state of Connecticut and are like, wow, that's really powerful. You have nearly 36 organizations already signed on in support. You've had a hearing with really powerful testimony and powerful questions. I mean, all the states where Green Amendment proposals have been put forth are watching one another and are being inspired by one another's successes, including successes here in the state of Connecticut. And in states where they don't have a Green Amendment proposal yet, they're looking around, seeing what's happening, and they're looking at what's happening here in the state of Connecticut and seeing that it's powerful and it's important, right? So you are an inspiration to one another if you're part of this Green Amendment movement, but you are also an inspiration for communities across the nation who know that they too, like we here in Connecticut, need this most powerful protection for our environment. Now, I sort of began by saying that we needed transformational change when it came to environmental protection, and that I believe, as a 30-year activist and attorney working in the environment, that Green Amendments bring this transformational change. So I just want to explain a little bit how and why. Green Amendments are very empowering legally, and they're very empowering in terms of environmental activism. So legally, Green Amendments lift environmental rights. You've heard me say it already. I'm going to say it again. Lift up environmental rights so they get highest constitutional standing. It places environmental rights on par with those other human, civil, and political rights that we all hold dear, like the right to free speech, like the right to freedom of religion, like private property rights, like the right to bear arms. We all know, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, we all know how powerfully those rights are protected. How when somebody claims that there's been an infringement on those constitutional rights, how the community rallies around to come and stand by that person who feels that their right has been infringed upon. How the press, the media instantly starts to pay attention and write powerful stories about it. How legislators come forth and demand that the constitutional right be restored. and how judges and justices listen carefully to the cases that are put before them. And for the most part, not always, but for the most part, do their best to ensure that the constitutional entitlement, the constitutional right in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution is preserved, is protected from government infringement. Well, that same powerful protection now comes to bear for the environment when you have a Green Amendment. It means, again, all government officials at every level of government, from the local town council to the state legislature to the governor's office and all the regulatory agencies in between, become constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people at every stage of decision making. From day one when they're decision making, when it is the easiest opportunity to make change and ensure critical environmental protections. And they have to protect these environmental rights and these natural resources, again, can't say it enough, equitably for all people. When you have a Green Amendment in place, all the laws that are already on the books, they still remain. They're still important if they've been doing part of the good job of protecting the environment. But now all of those existing laws have to be read through the lens of the constitutional entitlement. Now, clean water can't be defined as polluted water. Clean water actually has to be defined, if it's written in a piece of legislation, as clean water, right? It has to be interpreted and approached that way, because every single existing law is being interpreted and applied, again, through that lens of the obligation of the government to protect the rights of the people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. Where there are gaps in the laws, where the laws are missing, where there's a loophole that has been written in, the people can turn to the Constitution to try to get a remedy. How many people have heard about PFAS? Right? PFAS is a man-made family of chemicals found in stain-resistant clothing and carpeting. It's in Teflon. It's in firefighting foam. People are hearing about it all over the place. And why are they hearing about it all over the place? Because it's really toxic stuff that is in the drinking water supplies of hundreds of millions of people across the nation. It's in fish flesh. It's in deer flesh. It's in farms and farming and wreaking havoc there. Why is PFAS wreaking so much havoc? Because of an absence of law. Because since its inception, and only now is it starting to change, there have been no laws and no regulations to regulate the use of PFAS in devastating ways that have allowed this dangerous chemical to slither out into the environment, slither into people's drinking water supplies, slither into our bodies, and cause harm. If we had a constitutional Green Amendment in every single state when PFAS was coming out, was this emerging contaminant out of industry, and we started to see the science about how damaging and dangerous it was, we, the people, could have turned to our constitutional right to clean water and a healthy environment to get our government officials to take action sooner, more meaningfully, so they could prevent harm. And in fact, that's part of what a Green Amendment does. It reorients all government action. So it's focused on prevention of pollution, degradation, and harm, not just managing it through reviews and permits. Right? So the Green... It is not just coming to light now. But we're not going to debate it. Oh, thank you. But I'm going to disagree with you because, and you can read about it in the book, we have actually known about it and by the way, not a penny from the book goes into my pocket. Every penny for the book goes to the Green Amendment movement. It's not about making money, it's about saving the world. The book is just a way to get the message out. Anyway, but I appreciate you for saying that. But I do want to say one of the things that I'm very clear about in the book is that we have known about the damages of PFAS for a long time. At least our government officials have, and they haven't done anything. But if we had had a Green Amendment, we could have used that to get more meaningful action sooner. And in fact, we did that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But that's another story. When we have a constitutional Green Amendment, our goal is to get our government officials to make better decisions sooner, right? To make better decisions when it comes to environmental protection. So they're genuinely protecting us and our environment and really doing that critical, important job. But when our government officials fail us, and take actions and activities that infringe upon our constitutional rights to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, with a constitutional Green Amendment, we can get immediate access to the courts to try to hold them accountable and to get that necessary remedy. But the Green Amendment isn't just about transforming the law, which it does beautifully and powerfully and meaningfully. It's not an instant panacea. But it is taking the most powerful legal tool we have in this nation, our state and federal constitutions, and putting it to work for the environment. But it's also very empowering for activists and activism. Because, right now, if you're an environmental advocate, I don't even want to say activists, right? There are a lot of people, they're just living their life, but something bad's about to happen in their community. And they want to get up at a public meeting or go to a hearing, and they want to advocate for the trees and the rivers and the environments and the wetlands and the people they love that are going to be impacted by whatever it is that's being proposed. So often people will go up, whether you're a seasoned activist or not, you go up there and it can be a little bit unnerving. Right? And you start to say your words, speaking on behalf of the environment, and inevitably somebody in the room will say, or even somebody on the decision-making dais with their body language will suggest, you're just a tree hugger. You're just a fish lover. You're a people hater. You're a job killer. Or like the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, when referring to me and some of my colleagues, you're an eco-jihadist. And they're suggesting that you should sit down and shut up. And they're trying to intimidate you to sit down and shut up. But the thing is, when you have a green amendment, and I just want to say, by the way, tree hugger, fish lover, I'm all in. Please call me that. I am a tree hugger and a fish lover, and I'm a people lover, and I'm a job creator, and I'm all those things. Right? So that's good. But when you are getting up to advocate for the environment and you have a green amendment in your state constitution or ultimately in our federal constitution, you are now not just a tree hugger and a fish lover. You are a United States patriot that is rising up to demand and defend your constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. It transforms the whole conversation. You are now a constitutionalist, right? And so it's really hard for the people in the room to be so dismissive of you. When it comes to the U.S., even if people disagree with you, if you are talking about a constitutional right, they view you differently, right? And all the decision makers on the decision-making dais that used to fold their arms and they'd lean back and they'd roll their eyes, when advocates would come up to speak in defense of the environment, not all of them, right? Where's Representative Michel? He's not one of them. He's one of our best activists. He stands up with you, right? And we appreciate you for that. But there are some who are up there and roll their eyes, right, and pretend to be bored and try to get you to sit down and shut up with their signs of boredom. They can't do that anymore, right? Because now what you're talking about is their constitutional obligation to protect your fundamental right, your fundamental entitlement, your fundamental freedom to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. So the whole dynamic when it comes to environmental activism, environmental advocacy, that whole conversation now is transformed if you have a green amendment in your state. And so with that, I just want to finish with one little reading from the book that I think really sums it up. And some of you may have heard this joke before, but I really think it every time I say that. I want to do one final reading, and I think it really sums it up for me. And I always say, of course it sums it up for me. I wrote it. So here it is. And I hope it sums it up for you too. No matter where you happen to live, I'm here to say that you should dramatically raise your expectations when it comes to the environment. You have a right to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and a healthy environment. This right is inherent and indefeasible. It belongs to you. Many politicians rail against entitlements and dismiss millennials as an entitled generation, but they've got it wrong. Entitlement is not a dirty word. It's a recognition of rights. And make no mistake about it, when it comes to the environment, you are entitled. So thank you for joining me this evening.